we have in the center of the table, if you haven't had any yet, feel free to take a little bit and pass it along. This is the mood lifting trail mix. And it has almonds and raw cacao nibs and goji berries. And so Virginia was asking, I keep hearing about goji berries, what are they good for? And it brings up a really good point, which kind of segues nicely into the whole beginning of this workshop, which is the question you're going to always have on your mind and that you'll hear people ask is well, what is this herb good for? And it's really hard not to get into that kind of talk because that's kind of what we've been taught in terms of you take antibiotics if you have an infection or you use things for a specific purpose. But the better question with herbs and plants is what kind of person who is suffering from what kind of problem is this a good match for? So it's being an herbalist or using herbal remedies is more like being a matchmaker, kind of bringing together the personality of the plant with the personality and the situation of the human who needs some support. So what you're going to hear me do and what we're going to experiment with a little bit in the next few minutes is trying to match up well, if you want, there are lots of herbs that are good for digestion, but what herbs are good for you or what herbs are good for the person that you're trying to support? They're nutritious, just like any fruit. So they have lots of, vitamin C and other kinds of, carbohydrates, fiber, things that are good for you anyway. And so they're kind of on the food side of herbal medicine where it's a little bit more the benefits you'd get from eating raisins or prunes. And they also have, in traditional Chinese medicine, we use them especially for conditions where people are run down and feeling exhausted, and especially if they're kind of pale and maybe even anemic looking, if sort of the face is pale, the lips are pale, the person feels tired. Goji berries are especially indicated in cases like that. So if you are somebody who's feeling kind of drained, like vampires sucked your blood and you're really drained and tired, making a tea with goji berries just dried and then pouring some hot water over them is a really, really good option. So any questions about that idea of sort of the matchmaking between herbs and people? Thoughts?
What are some indicators that you've hit on a good match? How do you know when you've found your secret?
Generally, there's a couple things. The first thing is, even though not all herbal medicine tastes good, I've tried to focus on things that would taste pretty good today, but it doesn't all taste good. Sometimes it's really bitter, it's not yummy. But even when it's not a great tasting thing, generally when you're using something that's good for you, you have that feeling, kind of like you described about the lemon juice. Even though it's not that pleasant to drink a shot of lemon juice, when you feel that you need it, I bet you have an experience, something that agrees with me somehow, so that will often be an early indication. But the real proof is that people actually get better and the situation starts to change. So sometimes it can be a little hard to tell with yourself because if you're treating a cold or something like that, these conditions tend to be self-limiting anyway, and they kind of tend to get better on their own. But over time, as you work with these things, you'll develop a sense of knowing no, I feel I'm getting better faster than I would otherwise. That's the best answer, I think, for people who are working with things at home.